The sun had barely risen over Maplewood, casting a gentle glow on the modest houses that lined the dusty streets. Shannon moved with practiced efficiency, scrubbing the kitchen floor while her mother prepared breakfast. The aroma of eggs and toast filled the air, a familiar comfort. "Shannon, can you hang out the laundry when you're done?" her mother asked, not looking up from the stove. "Of course, Mum," Shannon replied, her voice steady despite the weariness in her bones. She loved her family, but the endless cycle of chores and routine often made her feel like she was trapped in a never-ending loop. As Shannon carried the basket of wet clothes to the backyard, she glanced over at the small garden her father tended with such care. The sight of the blooming flowers always brought a smile to her face. Later that afternoon, Shannon met Lisa by the old oak tree at the edge of town. Lisa's eyes sparkled with excitement, her enthusiasm a stark contrast to Shannon's quiet demeanor. "Guess what, Shannon?" Lisa said, unable to contain her excitement. "There's a chance for us to go to the city." Imagine New York City with all its opportunities and excitement. Shannon's heart skipped a beat. The city had always seemed like a distant dream, a place where anything was possible. "Really? How? What kind of opportunity?" "My cousin lives there," Lisa explained. "She says there are plenty of jobs and we could stay with her until we get on our feet. It's a big step, but I think we should take it." That night, over a simple dinner of pasta and potatoes, Shannon broached the topic with her parents. "Mom, Dad, Lisa told me about a chance to go to New York City. I think I want to go." Her mother dropped her fork, a look of shock crossing her face. Her father's expression was unreadable. "Shannon, why do you want to leave Maplewood?" her mother asked, her voice trembling. "It's not that I don't love it here," Shannon said, her eyes pleading for understanding. "But I want more. I want to see the world, have opportunities, and make something of myself." Her father sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "There's something we need to tell you, Shannon, something we've kept from you." Shannon's heart pounded in her chest as her father got up and fetched a worn envelope from a drawer. He handed it to her with trembling hands. "This is your adoption certificate. We adopted you when you were just 1 year old." For a moment, the room was silent. Shannon stared at the paper, her mind racing. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she whispered. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "We loved you from the moment we saw you. You were always our daughter, and we didn't want you to feel any different." Shannon felt a wave of emotions wash over her, shock, confusion, but also a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for loving me and raising me as your own." Her father reached out and placed a hand on hers. "We support your decision to go to the city, Shannon. We just want you to be safe and happy." Over the next few days, Shannon's parents helped her pack, their actions filled with love and care. Her mother sewed extra pockets into her clothes for practicality, while her father handed over a small bundle of savings they had managed to put aside. Shannon folded the last of her clothes into the worn suitcase, her hands trembling slightly. The room was filled with the scent of lavender, a comforting aroma from the sachets her mother had tucked into her drawers over the years. Lisa was sitting cross-legged on the bed, her own suitcase already packed and zipped up. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Shannon's mother asked, her voice a mixture of concern and pride. Shannon nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes, Mum, it's time. Lisa and I have been dreaming about this for years." Her mother sighed, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. "Just promise me you'll be careful. New York City is a big place and it's easy to get lost." "We'll be fine, Mrs. Thompson," Lisa interjected, her tone brimming with confidence. "We've got each other." The goodbyes were tearful, but hopeful. Shannon hugged her parents tightly, feeling the weight of their love and the bittersweet sorrow of leaving. She took one last look at her childhood home, the small garden where she had spent countless hours dreaming of a different life. Lisa's parents were there too, standing by their car, waving and shouting last-minute advice. As the bus pulled away from Maplewood, Shannon felt a surge of excitement mixed with a tinge of fear. Lisa, sitting next to her, was practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "Can you believe it? We're actually doing this," Lisa said, her eyes sparkling. Shannon smiled, the corners of her mouth lifting despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach. I know. It feels surreal. The bus ride was long, but the hours flew by as they talked about their plans. Lisa was eager to find work at the trendy cafe her cousin had mentioned, while Shannon hoped to find a job that would allow her to save money and eventually go to school. They shared their fears too, about living in a big city, about making ends meet, about the unknown challenges that lay ahead. The city rose up around them as the bus neared its final stop. New York City was a cacophony of sights and sounds, a stark contrast to the quiet, familiar streets of Maplewood. Shannon's breath caught in her throat as she took in the skyscrapers, the throngs of people, the energy that seemed to pulse through every corner. They found a small apartment in Brooklyn, affordable but far from luxurious. The walls were thin and the paint was peeling in places, but it was theirs. The first night was spent unpacking and arranging their belongings, making the space feel like home. This is it, Lisa said, standing in the middle of the small living room, hands on her hips. Our new start. Shannon looked around, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. Yeah, our new start. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Shannon and Lisa pounded the pavement, dropping off resumes and filling out job applications. They navigated the subway, learned the layout of their neighborhood, and started to find their rhythm in the city. One evening, after a particularly long day of job hunting, they found themselves sitting on a bench in Prospect Park. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the trees and the buildings beyond. Do you ever think about what you left behind? Shannon asked, her voice quiet. Sometimes, Lisa admitted. But then I remember why we came here. We wanted more than what Maplewood could offer, and we'll get there, one step at a time. Shannon nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. You're right. We will. The next day, Lisa landed a job at the cafe, just as they had hoped. Shannon found work as a waitress at a diner a few blocks from their apartment. The hours were long and the work was hard, but it felt good to be earning their own way. Slowly, they began to settle into their new lives. They made friends with their neighbors, explored the city's many neighborhoods, and found joy in the small victories, like getting through a shift without making any mistakes or discovering a new favorite coffee shop. Through it all, they supported each other, just as they had promised. The city was vast and intimidating, but together they faced it head-on, ready for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. In their small apartment in Brooklyn, amidst the chaos and the noise, Shannon and Lisa found their footing, their dreams intertwined with the vibrant life of New York City. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the city, and Shannon felt a mix of excitement and nerves as she stepped into the cafe for her first day of work. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries greeted her, along with the bustling sounds of early morning patrons. Welcome to Java Haven, said Maria, the manager, a no-nonsense woman with a warm smile. You'll be working the morning shift, which is our busiest. Stick close to me and you'll be fine. Shannon nodded, her heart pounding. She tied her apron and followed Maria to the counter. Customers streamed in, each with their own specific order, and Shannon did her best to keep up, scribbling down requests and navigating the espresso machine. Hey, you're doing great, Lisa said during a brief lull, giving Shannon an encouraging pat on the back. Just breathe. Shannon took a deep breath and smiled. Thanks, Lisa. I needed that. Midway through the morning rush, the door chimed and a young man entered. He had an air of casual confidence with tousled brown hair and a charming smile that seemed to light up the room. He glanced around, then approached the counter. Good morning, he said, his voice smooth. I'll have a caramel macchiato, please. Shannon fumbled with her pen. Sure, coming right up. As she prepared his drink, she felt his eyes on her. It made her nervous, but also intrigued. When she handed him the cup, he smiled warmly. I'm Kyle, by the way. And you are? Shannon, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Nice to meet you, Shannon. I'll see you around. With that, he turned and found a seat by the window. Days turned into weeks, and Kyle became a regular. Each morning, he would order the same caramel macchiato, exchanging pleasantries with Shannon. He had a way of making her feel at ease, despite the chaos of the morning rush. One afternoon, as the cafe was winding down, Kyle approached the counter with a small bouquet of daisies. "These are for you," he said, handing them to Shannon. "I noticed you've been working really hard. Thought you might like a little something to brighten your day." Shannon blushed, taken aback by the gesture. "Thank you, Kyle. That's really sweet." Kyle's visits became more frequent and his attentions more deliberate. He would linger after the morning rush, asking about her day, her interests, her dreams. Shannon found herself looking forward to his visits despite her initial reluctance. One evening, as Shannon was closing up, Kyle appeared at the door. "Hey, Shannon, want to grab a coffee with me?" She hesitated, her mind racing. She enjoyed Kyle's company, but she was wary of getting too close. Her focus was on her job and building a new life in the city. But there was something about Kyle's persistence, his genuine interest in her, that made her want to say yes. "Sure," she said finally. "I'd like that." They found a quiet cafe a few blocks away. As they sipped their drinks, Kyle shared stories about his life, his love for photography, his travels, his aspirations. Shannon listened, captivated by his passion and sincerity. When he asked about her dreams, she found herself opening up more than she had with anyone else. "I've always wanted to go to school," she admitted, "to study something that I'm passionate about. But for now, I'm just trying to make ends meet." Kyle nodded thoughtfully. "I admire that. It takes a lot of courage to follow your dreams, especially in a city like this." As the evening wore on, Shannon felt a growing connection with Kyle. But along with that connection came a sense of conflict. She liked Kyle, more than she was willing to admit, but she also knew that she needed to stay focused on her goals. Walking back to her apartment, Shannon's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She wanted to trust Kyle, to let herself feel something more, but she couldn't afford to be distracted. Her new life in New York City was just beginning, and she needed to be strong. "I had a great time tonight," Kyle said, stopping at the corner of her street. "Can we do this again?" Shannon smiled, though her heart was heavy with uncertainty. "I'd like that," she said. "But let's take things slow, okay?" Kyle nodded, understanding. "Slow is good. I'll see you tomorrow, Shannon." As she watched him walk away, Shannon felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could have both, a chance to follow her dreams and someone to share them with. The evening air was crisp, and the city lights twinkled like a million tiny stars as Shannon and Kyle strolled through Central Park. Kyle had been unusually quiet all day, and Shannon's curiosity had been piqued. They reached a secluded spot by the lake, where a small gazebo stood illuminated by soft, flickering lanterns. Kyle stopped and turned to Shannon, his expression earnest. "Shannon, there's something I've been meaning to ask you," he began, reaching into his coat pocket. Shannon's heart raced. She had a feeling about what was coming, but the reality of the moment left her breathless. Kyle dropped to one knee, holding out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Shannon felt a whirlwind of emotions. She looked at the ring, then at Kyle's hopeful face. This was what she had dreamed of, a life with someone she loved. But doubt flickered in her mind. Was she ready for such a commitment? Could she balance her dreams with this new path? She started, her voice trembling. She took a deep breath, pushing her doubts aside. "Yes, Kyle, I will." Kyle slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced, surrounded by the beauty of the park and the warmth of their newfound promise. The next few weeks were a blur of excitement and planning. Shannon moved into Kyle's family home in Manhattan, a grand apartment that felt both luxurious and intimidating. The first day she stepped into the opulent foyer, she felt a pang of unease. The marble floors, the chandeliers, and the silent, pristine rooms were a stark contrast to her modest upbringing. "Welcome, Shannon," Kyle's mother, Mrs. Fuller, said, her voice cool and formal. "I trust you'll find everything to your liking." Shannon forced a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Fuller. It's very kind of you to let me stay here." Mrs. Fuller's eyes scanned Shannon from head to toe, her expression unreadable. "I hope you'll be comfortable," she said, then turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. Days turned into weeks, and Shannon tried her best to fit into the household. She helped with chores, tried to learn the family routines, and made an effort to be courteous and pleasant, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. At dinner one evening, the tension was palpable. Shannon carefully placed a dish of roasted vegetables on the table, only to have Mrs. Fuller critique her choice. "Did you use garlic in this?" Mrs. Fuller asked, her nose wrinkling slightly. "Kyle dislikes garlic." "I'm sorry, I didn't know," Shannon replied, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "It's fine," Kyle interjected quickly, trying to defuse the situation. "It looks great, Shannon." Shannon felt a pang of gratitude towards Kyle, but the discomfort lingered. She caught Mrs. Fuller's disapproving gaze and looked away, focusing on her plate. The days followed a similar pattern. Shannon felt like she was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to navigate the unspoken rules of the household. Mrs. Fuller's subtle comments and cold demeanor chipped away at her confidence. Even small interactions felt charged with underlying tension. One afternoon, Shannon was in the kitchen preparing a simple lunch. She hummed softly to herself, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. Mrs. Fuller entered, her expression as icy as ever. "You should be careful with those knives," Mrs. Fuller said, her tone implying incompetence. "We wouldn't want any accidents." Shannon nodded, biting her tongue. She wanted to retort, to stand up for herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she focused on her task, willing herself to stay calm. Later that night, Shannon confided in Kyle. "I feel like I don't belong here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother, she doesn't seem to like me." Kyle sighed, pulling her close. "It's just her way, Shannon. She's protective of me, and it'll take time for her to warm up to you, but I love you, and that's what matters." Shannon nodded, finding some comfort in his words, but deep down the unease remained. She had hoped for a perfect future, a life filled with love and acceptance. Instead, she found herself caught in a web of subtle hostilities and silent judgments. As she lay in bed that night, Shannon stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She loved Kyle and believed in their future together, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was fighting an uphill battle. The tension in the Fuller household had become almost unbearable. Shannon could feel it in the air, a constant, suffocating presence. Every day seemed to bring a new conflict, a fresh layer of stress. It started with the small things, like how the dishes were arranged in the kitchen. "You've put the plates in the wrong cupboard again, Shannon," Mrs. Fuller said, her tone clipped. Shannon took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Fuller. I'll fix it." Mrs. Fuller's eyes narrowed. "It's not about fixing it. It's about doing things correctly the first time. This is a household, not a dormitory." The undercurrent of disapproval in Mrs. Fuller's words stung, and Shannon felt a familiar knot of frustration tighten in her chest. She turned away, focusing on the task at hand, but the feeling of inadequacy lingered. Kyle, caught in the middle, seemed to grow more distant with each passing day. Shannon could see the strain in his eyes, the way he avoided prolonged conversations. One evening, after another terse exchange with his mother, he sighed heavily and sat down next to Shannon on the sofa. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Shannon's heart sank. "About what?" Kyle rubbed his temples, clearly struggling to find the right words. "About us. About everything. This isn't working, Shannon. The constant fighting, the tension, it's tearing us apart." Shannon looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and fear. "Kyle, we can make this work. We just need to find a way to get along with your mother. It's just a phase." Kyle shook his head, his expression pained. "It's more than that. I've tried to mediate to keep the peace, but it's affecting all of us. My mother, she's not going to change, and I can't keep putting you through this." Tears welled up in Shannon's eyes, but she blinked them away, determined not to cry. "So, what are you saying?" Kyle took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "I think we need to take a break, some time apart to figure things out." The words hit Shannon like a punch to the gut. She stared at Kyle, unable to process what he was saying. A break? You mean, you want to break up? Kyle looked away, unable to meet her gaze. I think it's for the best, for both of us. Shannon felt a wave of emotions crash over her. Hurt, betrayal, anger. You're just going to throw everything away, after all we've been through. It's not like that, Shannon. I love you, but this isn't healthy for any of us. Maybe with some time apart we can figure out a way to make it work. Shannon stood up, her body trembling with emotion. You're a coward, Kyle. You're just running away because it's easier than standing up to your mother. Kyle's face hardened. That's not fair. You don't understand what it's like for me. I'm stuck in the middle trying to keep everyone happy. And you're failing, Shannon shot back. You're failing us, Kyle. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Finally, Shannon turned and walked out of the room, her heart breaking with each step. She packed her bags in a daze, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of what was happening. As she left the Fuller house, she felt a profound sense of loss. Everything she had hoped for, everything she had dreamed of, seemed to crumble away. The love she and Kyle had shared now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of their situation. The streets of Manhattan were a blur as Shannon walked aimlessly, her thoughts a chaotic mess. She felt betrayed, not just by Kyle, but by the promise of a life that now seemed out of reach. She found herself at a small park, the sounds of the city fading into the background. Sitting on a bench, Shannon allowed herself to cry, the tears she had held back finally flowing freely. She had given so much, tried so hard, and yet it had all fallen apart. In the stillness of the evening, Shannon vowed to find a way to move forward. She didn't know how or where to start, but she knew she had to keep going. With a heavy heart but a renewed sense of determination, Shannon wiped her tears and stood up, ready to face whatever came next. Shannon trudged through the icy streets of Manhattan, the cold wind biting at her cheeks. Her mind was a whirl of thoughts and emotions. The memory of Kyle's betrayal and Mrs. Fuller's coldness still stung, but she knew she couldn't dwell on the past. She needed to survive in this unforgiving city. Days turned into weeks as Shannon pounded the pavement searching for a job. She faced rejection after rejection, her desperation growing with each passing day. She spent nights in shelters or on friends' couches, trying to stretch her dwindling savings. Every no felt like another blow to her spirit, but she refused to give up. One particularly harsh afternoon, Shannon found herself in Queens, following up on yet another job lead. The hotel was modest, nothing like the grand establishments of Manhattan, but it felt welcoming. She stepped inside, greeted by the warmth and the smell of fresh coffee. "Can I help you?" asked a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind the reception desk. "I'm looking for work," Shannon said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "I heard you might have a position available." The woman, whose name tag read Martha, smiled. "We do need some extra help. Can you start tomorrow?" Relief washed over Shannon. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much." The next day, Shannon began her new job. She threw herself into the work, determined to prove her worth. She cleaned rooms meticulously, greeted guests with a warm smile, and took pride in every task, no matter how small. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a fresh start. One evening, as Shannon was finishing her shift, a blizzard began to rage outside. The wind howled, and snow piled up quickly, turning the city into a frozen landscape. Shannon bundled up, preparing for the treacherous journey to the shelter. As she stepped outside, she noticed a figure huddled against the building, shivering in the cold. It was a young woman, her thin jacket offering little protection against the elements. Shannon's heart went out to her. "Are you okay?" Shannon asked, crouching down to the woman's level. The woman looked up, her face pale and tired. "I'm pregnant, and I have nowhere to go," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, can you help me?" Shannon didn't hesitate. She remembered her own nights spent on the streets, the fear and the cold. "Come inside. You can stay in my room tonight." They slipped back into the hotel through the side door, avoiding the front desk where the manager, Frank, was known for his strict rules. Shannon led the woman to her small room, offering her the bed and a warm blanket. "Thank you," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "My name is Thea. I don't know how to repay you." "Don't worry about that," Shannon replied. "Just rest. We'll figure things out in the morning." The next day, however, their secret was discovered. Frank stormed into Shannon's room, his face red with anger. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "This is against hotel policy." Shannon stepped forward, trying to explain. "Frank, please, she's pregnant and had nowhere else to go. I couldn't leave her out in the cold." "I don't care about your excuses," Frank snapped. "You've violated the rules. You're fired. Both of you out now." Shannon packed her belongings quickly, her heart heavy with a sense of injustice. She handed Thea her last bit of money, the meager savings she had managed to hold on to. "Take this," she said. "Find a safe place for you and your baby." Thea looked at her with gratitude and sorrow. "What about you?" Shannon forced a smile. "I'll manage. I've been through worse." With that, she stepped out into the cold once more, feeling the weight of the city pressing down on her. The wind cut through her thin coat, but she held her head high. She had done the right thing, even if it meant losing her job. As she walked away from the hotel, Shannon felt a strange sense of peace. She was alone and jobless, but she had her integrity. She had helped someone in need, and that was something no one could take away from her. Determined to keep moving forward, Shannon tightened her scarf and continued down the snowy street, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The winter had finally given way to spring, but the chill of uncertainty still clung to Shannon. She had spent the last few months working odd jobs and scraping by, trying to keep her head above water. She often thought about Thea and wondered what had become of her. One afternoon, as Shannon walked home from a particularly grueling shift, she heard someone call her name. She turned to see a sleek, black car pull up beside her. The window rolled down, and to her astonishment, Thea's face appeared, beaming with a radiant smile. "Thea!" Shannon gasped, unable to believe her eyes. "Shannon, get in!" Thea urged, her voice filled with excitement. Shannon hesitated for a moment, then climbed into the car. The warmth and luxury of the interior were a stark contrast to the cold, hard streets she had been navigating. Thea looked different, confident, composed, dressed in elegant clothing that spoke of a new life. "You look amazing," Shannon managed to say, still processing the transformation. Thea laughed softly. "A lot has changed, and I owe it all to you. Let's go somewhere we can talk." They drove to a high-rise apartment building in Manhattan. The doorman greeted Thea with a respectful nod as they entered. Shannon followed her into a beautifully furnished apartment, the kind she had only seen in magazines. "Welcome to my new home," Thea said, gesturing around. "Can I get you something to drink?" Shannon shook her head, still in a daze. How did this happen?" Thea sat down on a plush sofa, motioning for Shannon to join her. "It's a long story, but I want to tell you everything." As they settled in, Thea began to recount her journey. "After you helped me that night, I managed to get in touch with some old acquaintances who pointed me to a shelter. From there, things slowly started to improve. I found out that my biological father had been looking for me." Shannon listened intently, her heart swelling with pride and happiness for her friend. "His name is Gavin MacDonald. He's a wealthy businessman. He didn't know about me until recently, and when he found out, he was determined to make up for lost time. He took me in, gave me a place to stay, and he included me in his will." Shannon's eyes widened. "That's incredible, Thea. I'm so happy for you." Thea smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It's been a whirlwind. I've gone from having nothing to having more than I ever imagined, but it hasn't been easy adjusting. And there's something else." She paused, taking a deep breath. "My father is very ill. He doesn't have much time left." Shannon reached out, squeezing Thea's hand. "That must be so difficult." Thea nodded, blinking back tears. "It is, but I'm grateful for the time we do have, and I'm grateful to you, Shannon. If it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be." Shannon felt a rush of emotions, pride, joy, and a pang of jealousy she quickly suppressed. You deserve all the good things coming your way, Thea. Thea's expression softened. There's something else. I want to help you, Shannon. You've done so much for me, and I want to return the favor. Please let me. Shannon's initial reaction was to refuse. She had always been independent, priding herself on her ability to get by on her own. But looking into Thea's earnest eyes, she realized this was more than charity. It was a friend wanting to help another. I don't know, Thea. Please, Shannon, Thea insisted. I have the means now, and I want to see you succeed. Think of it as an investment in our future. Shannon hesitated, feeling the weight of her pride and her struggles, but ultimately the desire to move forward, to seize the opportunities that had been so elusive, won out. Okay, Thea, I'll accept your help, but only because I know it's coming from a place of love. Thea's smile was radiant. You have no idea how much that means to me. As they sat together, planning and dreaming of what lay ahead, Shannon felt a sense of hope and renewal. Thea had been true to her word, and with Gavin McDonald's backing, Shannon was now the manager of a boutique hotel in Manhattan. The first few days were a whirlwind of learning and adjusting. Morning, everyone, Shannon greeted the staff at the morning meeting. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt a knot of anxiety. The team, a mix of seasoned professionals and new hires, looked to her for direction. Good morning, Miss Thompson, they chorused. Shannon nodded, trying to project confidence. We have a lot to do to bring this place up to its full potential. I want us to focus on cleanliness, customer service, and making every guest feel special. As the staff dispersed to their tasks, Shannon stayed back with Maria, the head housekeeper. Maria, I need your help with the new cleaning schedules. We need to be more efficient. Maria smiled, a warm, reassuring presence. Of course, Shannon. I've been thinking about a few changes that might help. Together, they reviewed the schedules, making adjustments that would streamline operations. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Later, Shannon walked through the hotel, observing the staff at work. She stopped by the front desk, where she found David, the receptionist, handling a particularly difficult guest with grace. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Carter, David said, maintaining his composure. We'll get that sorted for you right away. Shannon stepped in after the guest left. Great job, David. Handling situations like that makes a big difference. David smiled. Thank you, Miss Thompson. It helps knowing we have your support. The days passed, and slowly the hotel's atmosphere began to change. Shannon's leadership was marked by her hands-on approach and genuine care for her staff. She made it a point to know everyone's names, their roles, and even a bit about their personal lives. It wasn't just about running a hotel, it was about building a community. One evening, Thea visited the hotel with her son, Tommy. Shannon greeted them in the lobby, her face lighting up at the sight of her friend. Thea, Tommy, it's so good to see you, Shannon said, crouching down to Tommy's level. Hey there, big guy, Tommy giggled, reaching out to hug her. Hi, Aunt Shannon. Thea smiled warmly. We wanted to see how you were settling in. Shannon led them to a cozy corner of the lobby where they could talk. It's been challenging, but I think we're making progress. The staff is fantastic, and I'm starting to feel more confident in my role. Thea reached over, squeezing Shannon's hand. I knew you'd do great. You've always had a way with people. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Gavin McDonald. Despite his frail health, he exuded an air of quiet strength. Good evening, Shannon, Gavin said, his voice gentle. I thought I'd stop by and see how things are going. Shannon stood, a mix of respect and gratitude in her eyes. Mr. McDonald, thank you for coming. I'd love to show you what we've been working on. They walked through the hotel, Gavin listening intently as Shannon explained the changes she had implemented and the plans she had for further improvements. You've done well, Shannon, Gavin said finally, his eyes warm with approval. Managing a hotel is no easy task, but you're handling it with grace and dedication. Shannon felt a surge of pride. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Your support means a lot to me. As they returned to the lobby, Gavin took a moment to speak with Shannon privately. You have a gift, Shannon, not just for management, but for leadership. People trust you, and that's invaluable. Shannon nodded, humbled by his words. I want to make this place something special, not just for the guests, but for everyone who works here. You're already on your way, Gavin said with a smile. Keep pushing forward, and remember, I'm here to guide you whenever you need. As the evening drew to a close, Shannon felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The challenges were far from over, but she was no longer facing them alone. With Thea by her side, the support of Gavin and the growing bond she was forming with her staff, Shannon knew she could overcome whatever lay ahead. Walking back to her office, Shannon paused to look around the bustling hotel. It wasn't just a place of business, it was a place of new beginnings, for her and for everyone involved. And that was something worth fighting for. Shannon stood in the hotel lobby, the hum of activity around her, feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't known before. It had been months since she'd taken over as manager, and the transformation was palpable. The hotel was thriving, and so was she. But an unexpected revelation was about to shake her world once more. "Shannon, can we talk?" Gavin MacDonald's voice cut through her thoughts. His tone was serious yet gentle. "Of course, Mr. MacDonald," Shannon replied, sensing the gravity of his request. They moved to his office, a quiet, dignified space filled with the faint scent of old books and polished wood. Gavin gestured for Shannon to sit, then took a seat across from her. "I've been doing some digging into your background," he began, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of apprehension and compassion. "I didn't intend to pry, but certain things came to light that I felt you should know." Shannon's heart raced. "What is it?" Gavin took a deep breath. "Shannon, you and Thea are not just friends, you're sisters, twins in fact." The room fell silent as Shannon absorbed the news. She felt a rush of emotions, shock, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of connection she hadn't expected. "Sisters," Shannon whispered, her voice barely audible. Gavin nodded. "Yes, I found records that show you were both born to the same mother." "She gave birth to twins, but circumstances led to you being adopted by different families." Shannon's mind raced back to her childhood, the unanswered questions, the feeling of being different, yet not knowing why. Tears welled up in her eyes as the pieces of her past began to fit together. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice breaking. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" Gavin reached across the desk, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "Sometimes life keeps secrets, Shannon, but now you know and you have the chance to build a future with this knowledge." The door creaked open and Thea stepped in, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Shannon, did he tell you?" Shannon looked at her, a mix of joy and sorrow in her gaze. "We're sisters, Thea, can you believe it?" Thea rushed forward, embracing Shannon tightly. "I always felt a connection with you, something deeper than friendship. Now it all makes sense." They held each other for a long moment, the weight of their shared history settling between them. When they finally pulled apart, both women were smiling through their tears. "We have a lot to talk about," Shannon said, wiping her eyes. "Yes, we do," Thea agreed, "and we'll face it together." The next weekend, Shannon, Thea, and Gavin traveled to Maplewood to visit Shannon's adoptive parents. The small town felt as comforting and familiar as ever, a stark contrast to the bustling city they had left behind. Shannon's mother opened the door, her face lighting up with joy. "Shannon, it's so good to see you." "Mum, Dad," Shannon said, stepping inside and pulling them into a hug. "There's something important we need to tell you." They gathered in the cozy living room, the fireplace crackling softly. Shannon's adoptive parents listened intently as she recounted the discovery of her true parentage and the fact that Thea was her twin sister. "We always knew you were special, Shannon," her father said, his voice filled with emotion. "And now we know just how special. We're so happy for you." Shannon felt a profound sense of gratitude. "Thank you for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." Thea and Gavin joined them, and the conversation flowed easily, filled with stories and laughter. The bond between the two families grew stronger, a testament to the power of love and connection. As the sun set over Maplewood, casting a golden glow over the town, Shannon stood outside with Thea and Gavin. She looked at the home where she had been raised, the place where she had learned the values that guided her. "I feel like I've come full circle," Shannon said, her voice steady and confident. "I know who I am now, and I know where I belong." Cynthia smiled, linking her arm with Shannon's. "We're in this together, sis. Always." Gavin placed a hand on their shoulders. "You both have incredible futures ahead of you. Embrace them with all you have." Shannon nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. She was no longer just a manager or a friend or a lost soul searching for her place. She was a sister, a daughter, and a leader ready to face the future with purpose and resolve. As they headed back inside, Shannon knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had the strength and support to overcome them. Her journey had been long and filled with hardships, but it had also led her to a place of belonging and love. And for that, she was endlessly grateful. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this story unfold. I hope you found it as touching and emotional as I did while writing it. You know, I firmly believe that God always blesses those who do good. Remember, happiness will come to those who persist and stay true to their values. Story reminds us all to keep faith, to keep doing good, and to trust that even in our darkest times, there is a light guiding us toward a brighter future. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming heartwarming and inspiring stories. Your support means the world to me and helps me continue creating content that we can all connect with. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay blessed, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next video.